The biggest myth is that ads only work if people click on them. Uh, Most marketers today, they live inside of Google Analytics. Most marketers today, they were trained in the digital realm before digital. And so they're used to buying ads and they're seeing clicks. And then they look at that relationship between clicks and whatever their key performance indicators are, leads or sales or downloads, whatever it is. And so there's a myth that if the data doesn't show up inside of there, that it didn't actually do anything. And so this podcast, for example, is a great example. There's thousands of podcasts out there, and people are learning about information from podcasts every day. But there's no place in this podcast for someone listening to it to click. And the problem with podcasts is that the impact from podcasts don't show up in Google Analytics. And that's one of the biggest issues today.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Expert. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours? Just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Jeff Greenfield. And Jeff we're going to be talking about a lot about marketing. Now, one of the fun things that that we're going to hit on is with Chat GPT and how that might affect or change marketing. Will it, won't it, and how it might. We're also going to be talking a little bit about, should you raise venture capital for either in the marketing space if you are a marketer, but even more so for marketing, and should you use that money for or raise money for marketing dollars. I'm talking a little bit about changes going on in the measurement and advertising space, and then we'll may even talk a little bit about Chat GPT with regards to SEO purposes and maybe creating content. So should be a great conversation. And with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Devin. So excited to be here today. Definitely some important topics to talk about.
Hey, it should make for an awesome conversation, so I'm definitely looking forward to it. So with that, before we dive into the topics at hand, just as a reminder to the audience, Jeff was on the sister podcast, The Inventive Journey. So if you want to hear a lot more about Jeff's journey and how he got to where he's at today, definitely go check out the episode there. But for those people that haven't had a chance to check out the episode, say, hey, I just wanted to snippet before we dive into the area of expertise. Why don't you give us a quick introduction to the audience?
Sure. I'm Jeff Greenfield. I'm CEO of Probalytics. Probalytics is a marketing analytics company that focuses on enterprise clients. Essentially, we use very detailed statistics, machine learning, and AI to measure the outcome and determine the effectiveness of what marketing is working, what marketing is not working for very large customers. And I've been in this space since the mid-2000s. And it's exciting times right now. Lots of changes and lots of disruptions going on in lots of businesses, but especially when it comes to measurement. So I'm excited to be here.
Hey, well, it should make for, I think, a fun and interesting conversation. So I'm going to take things a bit out of order, at least what I said, just because I think that one of the things that has certainly caught a large amount of people around the world's interest is Chat GPT. Now, and you could just go with machine learning and, using a lot of that. But I think for a lot of people, it never really made much sense as to what is artificial intelligence or machine learning, or how can I use it, until they saw a bit more of a real world application, at least for the common consumer. I'm sure there are industries that are very, using it to a high level, but I think that at least this made it a bit more real world. And so now it's kind of, one of those things where people are looking for applications. How can I use it? How might it make sense? Where can I leverage it? Seems like an interesting tool. And one of the ones that I keep hearing, at least from different clients and different guests and different people, is, hey, what do you think about using it for their marketing purposes? So, a few of them could just be, where I'll give one example, which is content creation, right? For the longest time, and I know I'm giving a very long wind up to a question, but I'll get to the question. But the longest time, you know, if you're going with Google search, and you can correct me where I'm wrong, because you're the expert, but content was a great way to help with your SEO ranking. So you put out good content, you put out great articles, informational, people lingered longer. It was or answering questions that maybe weren't as or answered in other places. You create all that content, helps you to rank better on Google. And now, you know, you have a great SEO score, more people are coming to your website. Awesome. Money rains from the sky, so to speak. Now, the question is, you know, people are looking saying, hey, I can go to Chat GPT. And I know that Google's coming out with theirs, even though it kind of had a failure for launch. But they're saying, go to one of these services and tell it to write a 5-paragraph article or 1,000-word article on X, Y, and Z. And while it's not 100% perfect, maybe it's not exactly accurate, it gets you a long ways down the road. And so is there any drawbacks, or is that a good strategy? Should you go and just say, write me this article, I'll go and humanize it or correct it, you know, proofread it to make sure it's accurate, and then go post it? Good, bad thoughts, anything, any feedback?
Well, I think first off, it's important to understand that ChatGPT is AI is essentially machine learning. Someone had to, and a group of data scientists had to go in and program this thing to give it a bunch of different options in order for it to function. And what you have in ChatGPT is a very nice layer that allows us to interact with it much simpler than we've ever interacted with computers before, because it can have a conversation, which is very, very cool. But what's important to understand is that it's only as up to date as, I think, 2020 or 2021. I've gone around and I've played with it, and I've asked it, you know, you know, what do you think is the top, let's say, presentations at this year's conference? And I give a specific conference name, and it gives me an answer. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. It's like magic. And then I go to the conference page and I realize that it gave me the answer from 2 years ago. So it's not accurate. The CTO for OpenAI, the folks who designed it, says that it will, since it's conversational, it's always looking for what is the next best word to use so that it makes the most sense. But from an accuracy standpoint, it's not accurate. So that's important to keep in mind, especially if you're trying to create content that you're going to be putting out there. But you are correct, Evan. Content is and always has been king. It's the way to get people to find you, and Google and other search engines definitely reward how fresh the content is. It's always been an important aspect to keep your content up to date. So what does ChatGPT allow? A lot of newsrooms have actually been using similar technology to create all of their news. But what they use is they use it and then it goes to an editor. So it does allow you to put out content faster, but you need to have a human at the end to kind of check it out. I think that's kind of the future of us is our job is going to be checking the work of the machines type of thing. So, and a lot of people are worried this is going to take away jobs. I don't think so. You know, technology is supposed to make our jobs easier. So this is going to shift some jobs around, but we still need people to edit and make sure it's correct and make sure it's actually in the correct tone. I mean, it is very cool though, because you can tell it to write an article as though Larry David from Curb Your Enthusiasm wrote it, and it will actually output and it'll read really kind of funny. So it's great technology. It's a lot of fun. And don't feel like you're behind if you don't know about it yet, because in 6 months it's going to completely change. So everyone, it will be behind unless they're checking it every day, and you can get up to speed very quickly with it. So don't worry about it yet. Right now, it's just still in the play stage.
Yeah, and you hit on a lot of great things. So a couple things maybe unpack for the audience. One is, I think it's 2021, because I was actually playing around with it, just trying to figure out, you know, how smart it was. And one of the things it kept saying, you know, you'd ask it update questions, and depending on how you ask it, say, well, I'm only can access, you know, up-to-date information as of when they let me, you know, as of 2021. And then I like to play with it and say, well, so do they, you know, why don't they let you know all of the new information? It basically says, I don't know, but it was kind of a fun thing. So yeah, I think that if you're to example, say, tell me what happened, you know, last week with the X, Y, and Z event, it's not going to have that information. But if you're working with, you know, take as an example, patent law. Patent law is a very slow, and that's what I do, you know, patents and trademarks, very slow moving. While there may be court cases here and there, a a lot of it's just answering common questions that people have about, hey, when should I get a trademark, or how do I get a trademark, or when should I get a patent? And those are simple questions. But,
Right.
those ones are ones where that's not going to change over the last year or two or three, and or not significantly. And so that's what I've looked at, even saying, okay, now if I go and have it write the article, I agree. I read it, and I, because I've asked that, and we've toyed around with it and said, hey, answer this question. That's, you can go and find the top questions that are, or search for, that also don't have very many answers, that are easy to rank on for SEO. And I get asking these questions. It gets, even for a non-attorney, just an AI, it gets you 85-90% there. And so it doesn't replace it, but it cuts down having to start with 0% versus starting with 85 or 95%. Now, one of the questions I've heard, or at least kind of people have tossed around, and get your thoughts, is right now, you do have Google that's trying to come out with its own AI. I think they had in development, they launched it, and it answered the question wrong, or at least it didn't answer it fully. And so that it lost a whole bunch of money in the stock market. And so people are wondering, but Google will get there. And I think they'll have, or introduce its competitor. But the question would be is, for now, let's take the hypothetical, and I know it's hypothetical, which makes it even harder to answer. You go and use this chat GPT or start using it for article creation. You do it with Microsoft, you see it getting to a point where Google is going to start penalizing you. In other words, because it almost, I could see the tension of Google worrying that now everybody's going to go to chat GPT, do all of this, and it's going to impact their ability to recognize what is good material or good content versus the 85% versus 100%, right? So I just go ask chat GPT a whole bunch of questions, have it write a whole articles, never proof it, never do it, and I just go stick it up on my website. It takes me 10 minutes to write 50 articles versus I proof it. So thoughts, and I know that was like a super
Yeah,
compound
no,
question,
no.
lots of things, but yeah, I was trying to get an
I
idea.
think based upon, working alongside Google for many years since they started, and understanding what their core job is, which is to provide fresh, updated information, and also seeing the content that comes out of Chat GPT doesn't look much different than something that someone else wrote. I think I don't think Google is gonna. There's going to be any issues that Google is going to have. I just don't see it, because I don't see much different between the content that comes out just by asking it a couple of questions and the stuff that a lot of sites are already putting out.
Yeah.
I think it's more of the same. I think there's quality and there's quantity. And we all know, because we've been to sites and it's just, okay, this article doesn't make any sense. And there's a lot of that's out there. And I think, Google's constantly tweaking and updating its algorithm as it does. I'm sure there'll be updates. Maybe there'll be a way for them to impact it, but I don't see how they're going to be able to know what ChatGPT would have said when they're coming out with their own version as well. I think what's going to be interesting, though, are the different applications. I mean, a lot of people use similar technology already. If you're like a Grammarly user, that's kind of AI assisted grammar. Where this could get very interesting and very fascinating is that if Google were to integrate this into Gmail, or if there was a way to integrate it into Gmail, and for folks who work with an executive assistant, a lot of companies have executive assistants who actually answer most of the email for the executives. But that takes like a year or so until the executive trusts them and they understand. Obviously, there's some emails that are personal that they handle, but most of the business responses, the assistant already knows how to do that. I think this technology could go in and read all your emails for like the last 2 years, and then could come up with suggestions for how you should respond to every single email, and do it in a way that would be in your voice and be very accurate with what I've seen so far. So I think it's going to be really fascinating to see the applications. That's what's going to come out over the next 6 months to a year. We're going to see a lot of startups that are integrating with this technology. And again, at the end of the day, should make our lives easier. It should give us more time for a little R&R, which is what this stuff is supposed to do. We were supposed to be working less hours by this time with computers and stuff. It just hasn't happened yet. But this, I think, should really kind of put us there.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that, that is a fear. And I think that, you go back, it's interesting, going off a tangent, and I'll circle back. people are worried that it's going to replace them, and it's going to make you go back to the Industrial Revolution where you started having machinery and things come out versus the very manual way they used to do it. And everybody was worried that all the jobs are going to go away and there wouldn't be enough to go around. And yet we find ourselves today, we're working as many or more hours than they were back then. And so it will be interesting to see how it adapts. Because I think, every time you kind of have the next jump forward or leap forward or whatever you want to call it, that it does force people to, one, see how they can leverage it and use it, but two, also reevaluate how they're doing it. And I think that the VA and kind of be able to go and have, maybe it's kind of like the Grammarly, but it writes a whole email. You can then just quickly proof over it, is really what the VA used to do. But they're now going to have to say, what do we do with the VA and how that, how that goes about doing it. So now one question, and then we'll probably jump to a different, topic, because we've only barely scratched the surface, already a good way to the podcast. But one of the things, we touched on, and I know I keep going back to, let's say it does email content creation, but content creation, just because I think a lot of people are looking at it for SEO. I gave the example, it can get you 85% of the way there versus, and reviewing it and updating it and get you 100% of the way for good articles. Is there or whatever that percentage is, and I don't know how you quantify that percentage, but is it enough? Is it making, if you are answering articles there are very few articles out there, right? Which is you go and find, or questions a lot of people have, not a lot of articles, helps you to rank more quickly. Does that last 10, 15, 20% impactful enough that you would want to slow down, spend your time and do that? Or would you just simply say 85% is good enough? I'm just going to go try and get ahead of the curve and get the articles out quickly. Does that make sense?
No, it does. I think what you're talking about is for categories that are not competitive.
Yep.
And so let's say you've created something brand new, a new widget that no one even knows about yet because no one's looking for it. But you're going to start doing a big push. And eventually when people go to search for your widget, you're the only person out there and you want these articles to come up. I'd say, yeah, absolutely. Start cranking it out with ChatGPT. You could get probably a month's worth of work done in a single afternoon, which is really, really cool. The question, though, is that once people start showing up and searching for your widget and they see these articles, you want to make sure that those get cleaned up a bit because they may not be accurate. But for just laying the foundation, I think for non-competitive stuff, I think it'd be perfect.
Yeah, and that's kind of my thought. And I said, I think you have to balance, and even the balance of maybe you put out the articles early so you get the higher ranking, and then then you go back, clean them up, make them better, and kind of flag which are the ones that you need to circle back to. So
absolutely.
Now, lots of things that we could talk about there, and I could probably go on, and I find it just, fascinating, not even just on ChatGPT, but just the how you could leverage different technologies that are come out to make you keep ahead of the curve, which I think is probably the bigger takeaway, whether it's this or anything else. Now, completely shifting gears to a degree, is still in the marketing and advertising and all that realm. But one of the other things that I think people often get into is when they're looking, whether it's SEO, whether it's paid advertising, it's usually more the paid advertising is we think, okay, I'm getting a business, I'm launching it, I need to go raise a whole bunch of venture capital, and a good chunk of that is going to go and blast the market and let everybody know about my product and where it's at and what it's doing and why it's awesome. And I'm just going to go spend tons of money on Facebook ads because Facebook ads are magic and just make you sell everything. I'm going to go sell a whole bunch on Google ads because Google ads are magic and sell everything. And so I'll just go blast a ton of money. And if I have the most money, I'm going to win. Good idea, bad idea. I have an idea as to probably what the answer is. But when you're looking at starting a business or in the realm of venture cap or raising money for your business, thoughts on how you should balance that with markets or marketing spend and where you should use it or if you should use it. And I'll pause there and see kind of your thoughts.
Yeah. So, I mean, the hardest thing to figure out is where you start to kind of lay your foundation of marketing spend. In the beginning, it's pretty simple. Most like direct to consumer businesses will start on Facebook, which it's the same advertising platform for Instagram. So Facebook and Instagram, a lot of businesses today just get built from right there. And it's great. If you're in that single platform, you can easily figure out which ads people are responding to, which ones are working, because the only place they can figure it out from is Facebook. So Facebook's working because you're only there. The minute you add in another channel like Google or Snapchat or TikTok, or any other one like Hulu, you start advertising on connected TV or Roku, or maybe you have enough money and you're advertising in Netflix. Now, all of a sudden, you've got 7 or 8 different places where people can find out about your product or service. And that becomes problematic because most people don't just go to one place. They surf around to different places. And with the technology, the way it works today, what they call behavioral retargeting, once someone visits your site once, they get followed around. So what ends up happening is that if you have 100 sales today and you're only advertising in Facebook or Instagram, you're going to see that Facebook and Instagram is probably taking credit for all 100, and that kind of makes sense. Once you go into Google, now, if you still have 100 sales, Facebook isn't going to take credit for all 100, and there's a good chance Google will as well. So now you have to do like some magic, mystical math there to figure out who gets credit. But once you add more than that, like 5 or 6 different channels where you're at, it literally can occur where every single sale has 5 different mothers or 5 different fathers. And then the math gets very difficult. The reason it's difficult is because now all of a sudden, let's say you do raise money, and that money is to be spent to grow the business substantially in marketing. Where do you spend more in order to build the business? What's actually working? And that is a problem that most businesses face. Now, if we go back a number of years ago, before digital was around, there was only a couple places where people figured things out from. It was TV, radio, and print. That was it. And so what that meant is that people would get a picture, a visual picture, or a mental picture from radio of your business, and then they would go and they would buy and they would walk in. And the only way to connect directly was through a coupon, but most people didn't have coupons. And so the only way to measure was through what they called probabilistic modeling, meaning I had to look at how many ads were in the market for one day, how many sales we had, and use statistics to figure out what was actually working and what wasn't working. And then when digital came around, all of a sudden, every time somebody clicked, you could follow it all the way through. And so as these channels started to, go out and we got more and more of them, you could actually use what was called deterministic modeling. You could know 100% because you could follow someone around. And if you up to date on all the news, you know about all the privacy regulations, and people didn't like how things were following them. So we've had a series of events now, but before that occurred, all of a sudden we were able to model everything deterministically. We didn't have to use statistics. We could actually see. It was really, really cool. And now we're living in a world where people can get messages not just from TV or radio, but from hundreds of digital channels. But now, because of all the iOS changes that have occurred, all the privacy regulations, and now next year we have the upcoming, they're calling it the cookie apocalypse. Third-party cookies are going to be gone. So businesses are not going to know when you go from one site to another anymore. And what that means is that we have a bunch of holes in measurement. So we now have to go back to probabilistic techniques in order to determine what's working and what's not working. But the amount of data is significantly more than it ever was. So we need to use advanced machine learning and AI, very similar to the technology behind ChatGPT, in order to solve these things. And that's part of why I built Provalytics, was to be able to answer questions that you can't answer when privacy is involved, and being able to get to help marketers decide what's working and what's not working when you don't have access to that user level private data. And that's the new world that we're living in today.
No, and I think that's a good point, and it'll be interesting. I mean, I think that the cookie apocalypse, I don't know if it's going to be kind of like, you had 20 or 2000 come around, and it was what's it called?
The Y2K.
Y2K, and it was all the computers are going to crash, and it's all going to go away, and we're going to go back to the Stone Ages. And I don't know if the cookie apocalypse is going to be a little bit like that, where they're going to figure out other ways to do it, or they're going to push back, or they're going to otherwise do it, or if it's truly going to be pushing back. And it'll be interesting to see. And I don't know if it'll be the actual apocalypse, or the pretend or Y2K apocalypse, or somewhere probably more so in between. But let me ask maybe one follow-up question, which is, So, whether or not you follow it around, because one of the other things, and I know it's going off a bit of tangent, but I've started to see is the other way people are starting to, in certain industries like mine and others, is they are starting to track more on, as an example, email, or they're going to track on, a lot of times, especially with COVID, calendar schedulers, right? Now I can actually see who is doing it. And then you'll just use a unique link. You can do it in Calendly or whatever that has a campaign. And now I can track, okay, I don't really care how many people come to my website, because if they're not buying anything, lots of traffic doesn't really give me a lot of return for most of their situations, unless you're very niche. But I do care if they're scheduling a strategy meeting or they're doing that. And so if I just give them a Calendly link or whatever schedule it is, or I give them a unique email, or I give a unique phone number. So it seems like, you see that as kind of going to be having a greater mix or less mix, or any thoughts on that as people are trying to adjust to how to continue to track things?
Well, I think what's important is what's not going away is what's called first party data. And first party data is the data that you're able to collect, which is data from your own website. So that just to back up a little bit, there's two different types of cookies. There's first party cookies and third party cookies. A first party cookie is if you're on your website or a website, cookies that have that website name in it, those are first party cookies. So typically any type of tracking that you have on the website, you'll be able to know how people got to your website. That you'll be able to know. What you won't be able to know is how did they hear about you and then decide to come to your website. So a third party cookie is if you're on the NewYorkTimes.com and an advertiser has an ad on there, and they're able to track you so that they know when you came back to their website months, weeks, years later. So it's that third party data that's going to be limited. Now, there are ways for companies to match, like if I have my first party data and you have yours, there's ways for us to match it together. Of course, I don't want you to have the personal information on my customers and you don't want me to have yours, but how can we work together? And what they've created now are what are called data clean rooms. So a good example of this is that Walmart has a lot of data on their customers. They know a lot of information of people who shop, especially on Walmart.com. And if I'm tied, I have some information on my customers, and I'd like to be able to merge that together to see how we can work together. So they have a data clean room where both parties put their data in there, but nobody gets to see it. And then they create these anonymous IDs to replicate for customer information. And that way they're able to work together, but nobody's actually sharing information. And Ty can't use that information off of Walmart.com, and Walmart can't use it off of their property either. So it keeps it kind of in that realm. But the first party data, the linking aspect, that's not going away. That will still be there, which is great. At least for now. Who knows what will happen in the future?
Who knows? I mean, it is interesting, and I can argue on both sides. I definitely get the business advertiser. Everybody wants to know, hey, if I'm paying for advertising, am I actually getting a return on it? And on the consumer side, they're saying, hey, I get tired of my privacy basically disappearing. And if I go and look on something on Amazon, it follows me around for the next next decade. It keeps trying to sell me forever. And so I think that I think that's where we're trying to find that reasonable balance. And I think it's an ongoing struggle. So it'll be interesting to see how it continues on.
It's a real catch-22, Devin, because what we want is I want to be able to go to a site, and let's say I add something to my shopping cart and then I don't buy it. I don't mind that site reminding me so that when I go to the New York Times, I see an ad for it. But then I go to buy it, and then I still see that ad for another couple months. So that's not good. So there is this happy medium that, publishers and advertisers and marketers are going to have to try to figure out. The other thing that's unique as well is that we're now entering this age where television is being streamed. And what that means is that the ads that you get in your home on your streaming device are completely different than your neighbor. So TV has now been digitized, if you will. And so it's important, though, that I don't mind getting targeted advertising, but I want it to be targeted to me. I don't want it to be targeted to something I've already purchased and I don't need anymore. So I think that even though we're putting up these walls of privacy, marketers and publishers have to work closer together And hopefully we'll get to this point where things can be even more personalized, but in a privacy centric way, so that I don't feel like my information's out there on the open web.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point, and it's one where I think that it's gonna require collaboration, which is again now that's also catch-22 because people want to keep as much data to themselves so they can charge for the data, and yet if you're really wanting to make it a better overall thing and probably address a lot of the concerns of user or customers pushing back, you're going to have to pry open things a bit more and start to share things that people tried to keep to themselves or more, or not sharing it or as broadly.
Absolutely.
We've already gone to the end of the podcast, and there are so many more things that we could have talked about, and I love metrics, and so we'll have to have you back on maybe in a future date and have an ongoing conversation. But at least for today, as we're wrapping up the episode, I always like to wrap up the episode with one question, so we're going to jump to that now, which is, within your industry, what is the biggest myth and why is it wrong?
The biggest myth is that ads only work if people click on them. Most marketers today, they live inside of Google Analytics. Most marketers today, they were trained in the digital realm before digital. And so they're used to buying ads and they're seeing clicks. And then they look at that relationship between clicks and whatever their key performance indicators are, leads or sales or downloads, whatever it is. And so there's a myth that if the data doesn't show up inside of there, that it didn't actually do anything. And so this podcast, for example, is a great example. There's thousands of podcasts out there, and people are learning about information from podcasts every day. But there's no place in this podcast for someone listening to it to click. And the problem with podcasts is that the impact from podcasts don't show up in Google Analytics. And that's one of the biggest issues today. Along with podcasts, television doesn't show up. Out of home, the ads on the side of the road don't show up in Google Analytics. CTV, connected television, streaming doesn't show up in Google Analytics. And so the idea is that advertising works, and it works in multiple ways. One way it works is people do click on things to buy. That's very what we call lower funnel. That's kind of the equivalent in the supermarket of when you're in the checkout aisle and there's a magazine right there or candy and you grab it and you buy it. It's right before you pay. But most advertising's job is to influence you. It's to tell you a story. It's to create an emotional hook and put a mental picture in your head so that when you're ready to engage further, you remember that brand name. Most of us today, we shop and we buy things based upon ads that we saw 20, 30 years ago. And there was no clicking back then. It was only an impression that we had in our brain. So advertising works, not just from clicks, but also from impressions. And most of the advertising doesn't actually appear inside of Google Analytics. So I kind of changed my answer around as I went along there, Devin. I hope it's okay.
That was a great answer, and definitely was a great myth to dispel, but also insightful along the way. So awesome. Well, now as we wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
The best way is to go to provalytics.com. That's provalytics.com.
Awesome. We'll definitely encourage people to go there, check you out, and if nothing else, make a new best friend. So with that, thank you again, Jeff, for coming on the podcast. It's been a fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners that are out there, to help us to share this expertise with even more startups and small businesses to help them along their journey into success, if you can click share, like, subscribe, helps us to make sure we can help all those businesses out there. And on that note, if you ever need help with your startup, your business with patents or trademarks, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Thank you again, Jeff, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thanks a lot, Devin. Have a great day.